the top characteristic of all money should be the preservation of purchasing power over time. We know all fiat currencies, just because we have inflation, do not serve that purpose. So money should serve to free people instead of financially enslave people. But today, all currencies in use, all global fiat currencies, really, I think, have the goal, as central bankers wanted to have, to enslave people rather than to free them.
Welcome to Rethinking the Dollar. Today I'm excited to have my guest, Mr. John Kim. He's the Managing Director and Chief Investment Strategist over at SmartKnowledgeU. Mr. Kim provides unconventional yet non-traditional education and investment strategies to help investors prepare for a brighter future with knowledge of sound money. Today he's going to join us to share his thoughts on the global economy as well as on fiat currencies. So John Kim, welcome to Rethinking the Dollar.
Thank you. It's my pleasure.
Well, as I mentioned earlier, I came across one of your videos from several years back, and I myself learned a lot from you. So the chance to have you on my show, I'm very excited. So looking forward to getting your take on what's happening over here in America, being that you're over in Singapore. So before I actually start, I start off usually with some Rethinking the Dollar questions. And the first question is, what comes to mind when John Kim hears the words Rethinking the Dollar?
Well, considering that the US dollar is still the top internationally held currency in the world, when I hear the phrase rethinking the dollar, I just think about rethinking what money is today and what it should be. And I think that really money should have as its number one goal the preservation of purchasing power over time, which no fiat currency in the world today lives up to that standard, nor does even the cryptocurrencies we have in use today, like Bitcoin, because they're just too young to really say that they're going to preserve purchasing power over time. Maybe they will over time, but right now, I don't think there's any currency that really holds purchasing power over time. And that's what I think of when I think about rethinking the dollar, rethinking currencies, rethinking money into sound money.
Right. Understandable then. A great explanation there. Now, next question is, the whole idea of rethinking the dollar is to help people become more monetarily aware or more monetarily literate, as I like to say. And so in your opinion, why is this subject, or is it probably one of the most important subjects that a person can come across at this point in history? What do you think about that?
Well, basically, because I think we've been fed literally like centuries of propaganda by central bankers and the commercial banking industry about what money should be. Because, like I said, the top characteristic of all money should be the preservation of purchasing power over time. We know all fiat currencies, just because we have inflation, do not serve that purpose. So money should serve to free people instead of financially enslave people. But today, all currencies in use, all global fiat currencies, really, I think, have the goal, as central bankers wanted to have, to enslave people rather than to free them.
Right.
So that's why it's important to learn about financial freedom, basically.
Right. Financial freedom. Good way of putting that. Now, next question is, if John Kim was given a chance to give what I like to consider the global state of the economy address, where you summed up everything happening on this planet, how and why and what would you tell the people?
Basically, again, I would just focus on the reestablishment of sound money, because I believe, we have a period of divisiveness right now, and I think all nations will continue to become more divisive. So if we really want to heal the growing divisions we have between people with differing political and religious views, with differing levels of socioeconomic status and race, that we must first reintroduce the world to sound money.
Right. I understand that. Sound money is a viable solution, it seems like. Now, you're over in Singapore, as I mentioned earlier. Now, so looking at what's happening over here in the United States, we have a new president, Donald Trump. He's not, the majority of Americans' favorite, as I like to say. But other than that, he's our president. So what's the feel like over there in Singapore? What's the thoughts of people in that area looking this way? Are they concerned? Are they excited? Or what type of feeling are you getting over there?
I think it's kind of split. Just like in the U.S., there are people that like them, people that don't like them. So I think that the powers that be, whatever you want to call it, you can call it TPDB, the shadow government, the people really control. I think they're being really successful as far as using him to divide people, because they always want political divisiveness, right? Like they always want people to belong to one side, because that way you can divide people so they're not working towards a common goal. So I'm not really sure like, of course, there are things he said that I disagree with. There are other areas that, he's been involved in that I agree with. But I think the jury's still out. It's only been 1 month, so it's really too soon to really decide, especially since it's so hard to know what's the truth these days, right? Because
Right.
you look at mass media and they're so biased, and channels like CNN, C-SPAN, you see the biases, so they can't be trusted as an unbiased independent news source. So in that sense, very careful about what I read, believing, what I read.
Right, right. I understand that. And so I know one thing that's been kind of controversial is the idea that he's come in and he's signed so many executive orders. So it seems like he keeps a pen in his hand and he's always signing something. And so he promised to bring change, and that's what he's doing. But yet it's kind of questionable, how is all this going to last throughout 4 years? I mean, it's his first month and it's already so intense over here. So, but that's just what's happening over here. So let me get your thoughts on, some people say Donald Trump's somewhat of a gold bug, or he has a gold past. What do you think about him and some type of gold, introduction into our system again, or what do you think about that?
I think that if he wanted to reinstate some money, because I've heard him say to reintroduce the gold standard would be great, but I just don't think that the powers that be would let him do that. I think they would try to assassinate him before that would actually happen, or introduce some kind of scandal where he would get impeached. So again, like I said, my feelings about him are still kind of divided because I look at his cabinet choices, right, and they're all corporate, like Exxon, like the former CEO of Exxon, I believe, was one of his cabinet appointees. You see a lot of Goldman Sachs cabinet appointees. So in that sense, he seems to be exactly like the Clintons, the Bushes, Obama, and the fact that he's very much entrenched in that establishment group. But yet, if you look, like you said, some of his executive orders, he withdrew the United States from the TPP, right, the Trans-Pacific Partnership, which is definitely like a New World Order directive that other heads of state around the world are on board with that. So I think, as far as, like you said, it's so early because it's only been 1 month, but my conclusion is, like, he's definitely well connected with establishment. You can't become a billionaire and not have those establishment connections, right?
Right.
But yet, I think, like, my feeling on presidential elections, prime minister elections, is that they're all selected, not elected. But in this case, I don't think he was their selection.
Right.
So in this case, I think that is what worries the true people in power, is that he's not their selection. So even though he's part of the establishment, he might not do what they want him to do.
Right, fair enough. I do agree. Now, I know in our mainstream media over here, one of the main topics was the fact that, the dollar is strong. And so it looks like the goal is to, I guess, weaken the dollar or whatnot. So there might be some things coming pretty soon that will create inflation, rather. Share with us your thoughts on how, a weak dollar here might, say, impact other nations, or may come over there to Singapore. Share with us a little bit your thoughts on the idea of a weakened dollar, even more than it is already weak.
Sure. Yeah, like you said, right? You realize that the dollar is already weak because whenever the mass media or the mainstream financial media talks about dollar strength, because they've been talking about how strong the dollar was last year and everything, it's all just relative strength, right? Because what is being compared to in the basket of currencies are the other major global fiat currencies, the euro, the yen, and the pound. So it's all being measured in relative scale. So all these currencies are still weakening, but if the US dollar weakens at a slower pace than the other fiat currencies against which it is measured, it seems to be strengthening, right? But when you look at absolute strength, it certainly hasn't been absolutely strong in recent times. So if you look at, for example, what I consider to be sound money, gold, if you look at the US dollar compared to gold over the past 10 years, has been plummeting, right? So I think the whole meme and narrative of the financial mainstream media wanting people to believe in a strong dollar it's a fake narrative, because it's just relative strength. It's not absolute strength.
Right, good point there. Now let's talk a little bit about, it's a mainstream topic here. I actually did a post on the other day about the currency war that's underway. And so it looks like, there's, as I say, a race to the bottom of everyone trying to, improve growth in their country. So they're, basically depreciating their currency. So how far do you think this could go? The idea of, Trump talking big about, China being currency manipulators, and, Germany. And so it's so much talk out there. How bad could this get, you think?
Sure. I think it's just a front for what the central bankers want, which is, like you said, a race to the bottom. So whenever state leaders talk about how another country's manipulating their country, it's kind of ludicrous when you think about it, because every country's manipulating their currency. So the Chinese are manipulating the yuan, the Germans are manipulating the euro, the U.S. is manipulating the dollar. And when I name the countries, I mean the central bankers, right, in those countries. So they're all weakening their countries. And as far as like how far I think it goes, I think it will actually go to where they'll destroy those currencies. So new form of currency will have to come into existence, and whether like in the euro, we may actually see the death of the euro, because if the EU breaks up, and it could be that way because there's important elections coming up in Holland, possibly Italy. Germany already kicked out Merkel and has a new president, so you could see the death of the EU possibly this year, the death of the euro, and then that's going to cause instability in the dollar, the pound, and other global fiat currencies as well.
Right. Now, you hinted at the idea of what's happening out east with the euro and things like that. Now, I want to touch base a little bit on what's happening in China. Someone posted a comment to one of the videos on my channel a while back saying that, everyone talks about the dollar, but the yuan and the renminbi itself is doing very bad. And China has over $200, trillion worth of debt within their own country. They're broke. So give me a little insight as to what's happening over there, because we don't really hear about economic events that's happening over in the Asian area. So share with us what's happening over there, in comparison to what's happening over here.
Yeah, sure. I think that basically every country generates propaganda, right? So in China, you'll probably get anti-US propaganda in some sense, meaning just like not anti-Americans, they don't dislike American citizens, but like US government propaganda. The US government produces anti-Chinese government propaganda. So you got to dig through all the rubbish, right, that comes out to really get to the facts. And what I see going on in China is that they're really purchasing gold at an enormous rate, like physical gold. So, if you look at recent stats, they're definitely, in my opinion, just from looking at import stats from Hong Kong, not even to mention the amount of physical gold they're importing from Switzerland. They're also buying up gold mines. Internally, they produced the most gold in the entire world. So they've overtaken South Africa as the #1 gold producer, and none of that gold is being exported out of their country. So I really think China, and no one is even talking about Russia, but Russia has also been accumulating physical gold like crazy. So I think China and Russia are actually 1 and 2, and I'm not even sure in what order as far as owning the most physical gold. So I think though China in the long run will be fine, because they are going to back their economy by gold. I don't think they'll officially back the yuan with gold, but they're going to unofficially back their economy in the yuan with gold.
Right. So you feel that all this gold accumulation is preparation on their part. I mean, I know, gold is considered a hedge against, all this fiat currency debt floating around there. So are you foreseeing, because I remember, I think it was last year, someone posted a picture on the internet about a gold yuan coin on a billboard over there saying, we're the next world reserve currency or something like that.
Yeah.
And so do you think, those plans are already in the making and ready to be rolled out in case this whole thing's coming down?
Yeah, it's going to be rolled out, but it's going to be rolled out like slowly, because the Chinese don't want to see gold going to $3,000 overnight either, like on a spike, because that's going to cause massive instability in their economy. So I think just even looking at the statements from government officials in China, you can see that their plan is that they want a gradual increase in the price of gold over time, and I think that's what they're looking for. And also, I don't know how much this is discussed in the U.S. and the West, but the Silk Road, the development of the Silk Road, do you know about that one, or they call it OBOR, One Belt, One Road? And that goes all through Africa, the Middle East, Asia, Russia. That is going to be really important to establishing the yuan as an international currency as well, because they are establishing trade and all the massive global resources along that route in the Chinese yuan, not the US dollar. So that's going to go a long way to establishing international confidence in the yuan, because eventually I believe that the PBOCs, the People's Bank of China, that their goal is to replace the US dollar with the UN as the established international currency in the world. But like I said, that's going to be a long process over time. It's not going to happen overnight.
Right. Now, so the Silk Road is something I hear about and I've heard about it, but of course it's not something that's even talked about here by most, alternative media guys in general. So can you start over with that and just explain that process and how that could be the foundation for the trade and commerce for the future, being that I'm assuming that, Eastern nations will be the primary, consumers, and we might be the primary producers in a not so good way over here. And so start from scratch and give us a little walkthrough with the Silk Road and give us the whole rundown, because I'm curious myself.
Sure. Well, just to be very general, the Silk Road is established trade route now through shipping lanes, and railway lanes are being constructed, like I said, to go through Africa, the Middle East, Asia, Russia, so and Europe. So it's huge, and what they're trying to do is, and I think it's going to become the most important economic route in the entire world. And the Chinese are trying to establish trade in all the commodities with all the nations involved along this massive global trade route in Chinese yuan. So they want to trade gold in Chinese yuan. They want to trade oil in Chinese yuan. They want to trade, all the massive natural resources of the earth that are mined in all these various countries, and they're establishing the trade routes to do it. Like I said, railways, construction of roads, shipping lanes, and so that's going to be a huge game changer. And I'm surprised that the alternative media is not really discussing that that much in the West, because that is going to be a huge game changer.
Yeah, and just the way you're describing it, now that I kind of am, trying to put the pieces of the puzzle together. I remember talking, hearing about, the BRICS and the bank, the China, the AAIB. And so all those acronyms that, are popping up, and, a lot of countries have joined and signing to join forces with that, as if that's going to be the economic powerhouse for the 21st century, kind of like the U.S. was during the 20th century, 19th century, during the industrial age. So it kind of sounds like,
Sure.
they're making preparations for after whatever. So that's I guess that could be kind of scary a little bit. Interesting. Yeah. So
the important thing is too that they've also established and funded with hundreds of millions of dollars development banks outside of the global banking cartel. So outside of the International Monetary Fund, outside of the World Bank, which were never interested in helping developing nations, but only exploited them by giving them, aid at enormous interest rates. I think I've read a lot of books about that. And when they gave aid to Jamaica, they would give aid at 23% interest rates with really punitive conditions, to get rid of all the programs, to help the poor, to feed the poor in order to pay the interest back. And that's what people didn't realize about the World Bank and IMF. Whenever you heard about these rescues of bankrupt nations, those conditions they imposed upon them were so punitive to their development. That's why a lot of developing countries have been able to move forward. So the BRICS realize this too, and they develop their own banks so they don't have to be subjected to these punitive interest rates and these punitive conditions in order to grow.
All right. Now you're a sound money advocate, and as well as an investment and strategist out there. Now over here, in the Western world, gold and silver is not something that people consider as money. And so it's more so just, a commodity that you might have if you want it, but why would you want it, as most people would say. So give us the attitude of gold and silver out there in the East. Do people actually recognize its value and, make it a priority in their portfolio, or is it considered investing over there? Is it considered saving over there?
It's considered more savings, because there's thousands of years of history saying China with gold is money. Even silver actually even has a longer history. But I found even in the times I spent in China that more people are more influenced by gold than silver. So they're more likely to invest in gold than silver, even though silver has a longer history, monetary history in China than gold. But in a lot of countries, gold is seen as money. So it's not even seen as an investment. It's seen as a way of preserving, like I said, preserving your purchasing power over time. And you probably know what actually has happened in India. But even in India, the poor because people say, people in the U.S. I talk to, even a lot of my friends, they say, "Oh, I just don't have the savings to invest in money."
Mm-hmm.
And I'll tell them, poor people in India, they take whatever rupees they have, and they can buy 1 gram of gold. They buy it because they know that gram of gold is going to preserve their savings much better than a rapidly devaluing Indian rupee.
Right.
So I said that's not really an excuse, because nowadays you can buy grams of gold and you can buy it online, independent, outside of the banking system. So if you save even $100 a month, you can put it out in gold. And people say, well, why would I want to do that? It's just $100. Well, you look at gold, like started in 2001 at $250. Now it's 5 times as much, right?
Yeah.
So I said, over that time, think about it. It's just 2001. If you put $100 away, that's now thousands of dollars. And then, say that amounts to what? That's $1,200 a year.
Yeah.
5 years, that's like $6,000. You would have $30,000. I said, wouldn't you want $30,000 now? Because that's how much you would have if you convert that gold amount back to US dollars, because it's 5 times as much, versus having $6,000 that could buy you infinitely less. The 6,000 could 12 years ago or 15, 16 years ago.
Wow.
So it makes sense no matter how you look at it. Even if you don't have a lot, I say just take what you have and put it away.
Yeah, good at
Put it away in sound money.
That's sound advice there. So the whole idea of rethinking the dollar is to give people an alternative way of thinking. I mean, most people only think in the form of paper and nowadays actually digits. And so speaking of digits, let's touch on Bitcoin a little bit. I mean, I had a guest prior to who mentioned Bitcoin as being an alternative, not saying it's, as good as gold, but it's an alternative to fiat currency paper. So share with me your thoughts on cryptocurrency. Is it something to really look into, or is it something just to speculate with, as my prior guest, Doug Casey, mentioned?
Sure. For now, I think Bitcoin is more of a speculation. That's how I would look at it. And just because the volatility, people are afraid to invest in gold and silver, even though it rises, and it's been rising, both of them, for 17 years now, since 2001, right? Over time, because they say, oh, it's so volatile every year. But if you have a long time span, I still very much believe gold and silver will keep rising in price. But if you look at Bitcoin, the volatility is even more, because just a month ago, it went from 1,054 just down to like 950 in a couple hours, because of news of Chinese regulations come out. So it dropped more than like $100, per Bitcoin in just 30 minutes. And that's happened multiple times over several years. So I think, like I said before, it's too young at this point to show that it can preserve purchasing power over time, because it's a very young currency. But I believe in monetary competition. So a lot of people say, oh, when you advocate gold, I'm anti-Bitcoin. You don't have to be anti-Bitcoin just because you're pro-gold, or if you're pro-Bitcoin, you don't have to be anti-gold. I'm all for monetary competition, because I think the best currency or best money will always rise to the top. So let the currencies come, because we don't have open monetary competition, right? No country in the world allows the use of gold and silver as money, right, to purchase goods and services widely in the system.
Right.
So you can see the currencies that governments are afraid of, and they're afraid of them because they're better than the fiat currency they offer to us for use.
Right, I do agree. Now, speaking of currencies, you hinted at India earlier. Now, is there any news or rumors or anything as form of cashless society out in the eastern region, as far as, of course, beyond India? Any other countries mentioning, removing cash or high denomination notes, or any talk like that out in your area?
Yeah, I think it's spreading a lot, but I don't expect that news to be covered in the mainstream media. I mean, I've heard calls for bans from important economists and bankers in Canada. I've heard in the U.S., like Larry Summers, I think, and Noor Rubini, the economist at NYU, had called for banning cash in America already.
Right.
In Australia, a friend of mine in New Zealand sent me an article recently where they called for the ban of the $100 New Zealand dollar note in New Zealand. So I think India, was just the testing ground, right? Because they always mess with the poor first. Yeah. So I think that was just the testing ground, and they want to roll that out systemically worldwide. And what's even scary in India is now that they're talking about, I read an article recently just about biometric chips
being I heard used. About that, yeah.
So for money. So that would have like all your personal information on it as well. And so they're not even talking just about digital money in the form of like you just have an ATM card and there's no cashing. They're talking about biometric chips being the form of digital money in the future in India. So that's kind of very Orwellian and scary.
Yeah, very much so. Now the question would be, like, would the whole plan of rolling all this stuff out occur before there's a meltdown, or do you think they can kind of hold things together and bit by bit implement these plans? Or do you think, it's they hope they can implement all that before something happens, it's in the form of a collapse or a reset or whatever guys tend to like to use? What do you think?
You've always heard that the most rapid change can happen during crisis. So I think it'd be hard to implement something like that before an actual crisis. But when a crisis comes, unfortunately, people turn to the government a lot for help. They say, help us, help us, help us. And that's when the bankers can implement something drastic, like a drastic change, because they will disguise that as helping them, even though it's going to be a system to further financially enslave them.
Yeah, unbelievable.
So I think, the answer to that is they're going to try to wait for some kind of systemic collapse before they roll that out.
Right. Now, let me get your thoughts on the SDR. And so I guess, it seems like the preparation for some type of shift has to do with implementing the renminbi into the SDR, I guess, to buy time or whatnot. But do you see that being something that was a part of the original plan of an alternative form of money to the dollar as a reserve currency, or can it still be, you think?
Yeah, I know that the Chinese yuan has been implemented as part of the SDR now. And I think that's just a move to appease the Chinese. But I don't really see I'm not really sure if that is their plan to have like a SDR. It could be for the one world currency, right? Mm-hmm. But if the EU fails this year or next year or before 2020, and the euro falls apart, then there's no chance for a global currency like the SDR to ever come into existence. Because, if the euro is going to fail, and people see the failure of one currency for, these many, many disparate economies in the EU, that made no sense to begin with. And the people had no vote and say, that was just implemented, right? And so if that fails, then I really don't see the SDR working either.
Yeah. Now,
even though they might try to, implement that.
Yeah, that's there's no telling what they'll do if they're desperate enough. So as we draw towards the end, you're an investment strategist, and so of course I'm sure you keep your eye on the stock market and things like that. And the Dow's touched 20,000 and it's climbing and things like that. Share with me your thoughts on the Dow, like from an investment standpoint. Not that we can give advice, but what are you telling people, or what do you advise people about the stock market? Is it time to get in or get out, or share with me your thoughts when you look at the total equities as far as they're just climbing.
You're talking just about the U.S. stock market.
Or yes, U.S. Because I don't have unfortunately I don't follow global stock. I just keep eye on the Dow because that's seems like the anchor of all stock markets. But share with me your thoughts on that. How high can it go, and will it ever correct?
Sure. What I look at is, as far as any asset classes, I just look at the risk reward paradigm, right? So typically you want low risk, high reward as the best entry point to purchase any asset, right? And I don't think there's anyone out there, even the mainstream commercial investment advisors, that would say the U.S. stock market is low risk right now, right? Because it's been inflated for 8 years continuously under the Obama administration. Trump gave it a good push when he became president, higher. And I don't think, Janet Yellen of the U.S. Federal Reserve just spoke yesterday, and she was a little more hawkish in her comments about, wanting to raise the interest rate 3 times. But that really is irrelevant anyways, because if a zero, okay, I shouldn't say irrelevant, because what she's talking about, right, is just a 0.25% interest rate, 0.25% interest rate, which should be irrelevant, because you think about the last time the U.S. dollar was in trouble, then interest rates went to what under Carter, like 23% or something. So we're talking right now interest rates, the Fed funds interest rates only 0.5% to 0.75%. We were talking about the Fed raising interest rates to 6, 6.5, 10%. Okay, so if a 0.25% interest rate collapses the U.S. stock market, and it actually could cause a lot of turmoil because it's such a bubble right now, I would just say the danger of investing in U.S. stocks right now far outweighs the rewards. It could still keep going higher for 6 months. Yeah. Maybe even for a year. I would say at most. I think after 6 months, it'd be struggling to go any higher after the first half of this year. But I think the risk reward setup is not a good setup. So I would avoid the U.S. stock markets right now, as far as like looking actively to get in.
Hey, I understand completely. Now, some people say, this year it's going to eventually, the idea of a recession is going to roll out to where, everything's going to line up and Trump is going to inherit a mess. And so if we actually enter into a full recession, then how can they raise rates? And then that's going to be interesting to see how they respond to it. And my prior guest, Mark Faber, mentioned about QE4 is pretty much guaranteed. So they're going to roll out some type of quantitative easing type of process. So it's no solution to the problem they've created. So it's unfortunate that we're, as citizens, going to be victims of it. But as we draw towards the end, I want to get your thoughts. The show is called Rethinking the Dollar. And so, of course, we don't have a magic crystal to tell what the future holds for the dollar, or the Federal Reserve note, I'd like to say. So give me your 2, 5, 10-year outlook on the Federal Reserve note as a domestic currency here in the U.S. and as a global reserve currency.
For 2 years, I think the U.S. dollar will still survive because, like I said, like we discussed, it's the most widely held international currency. So in order of failure, probably the yen will go first, then the euro, or the euro. The yen or the euro will probably go first, then the pound, and then the U.S. dollar. Just simply for the fact that it's the most widely held currency. 5 years, I don't know. 5 years, it might be a stretch for the U.S. dollar to survive in its current form.
Yeah.
So maybe they have to roll out a new U.S. dollar and say 2 old U.S. dollars are worth 1 new U.S. dollar. But that's basically a complete collapse, right? If they have to do that.
Yeah.
So I have doubts about the U.S. dollar lasting 5 years, and then I have serious doubts about it lasting 10 years.
Yeah, I do agree. Well, John Kim, I thank you for sitting down with us here at Rethinking the Dollar. Can you give those that may not be familiar with you, where they can find you at, how they can, follow your work, and any type of products or newsletters you may offer? Tell the audience where they can find you at.
Sure. They can find us at SmartKnowledgeU.com. Again, SmartKnowledgeU, like university.com. And also, if I just may plug a new service we're going to roll out pretty soon.
Yeah, please do.
It's called Smart Knowledge Wealth Academy. So that can be, our website's not up, but we're developing in that right now, called skwealthacademy.com for smartknowledgewealthacademy.com. And that's basically, it's going to be an online education academy based upon the principle that if you do not have wealth of creativity, compassion, friendship, health, and most importantly, happiness, but only financial wealth, then in reality, I believe you're still poor in life. So we want to expand the traditional definition of wealth and success that includes a component of how you pursue those 2 goals that should also positively impact not only your community, but humanity in general. Because there's a lot of pursuit of success and money today that totally forgoes the impact that people have upon their community and upon humanity. And I think that's a wrong way to look at success and wealth. So I want to help reshape the traditional definition, or maybe radically reshape the definition of success and wealth, to also include compassion for your fellow human being, health, and happiness as well. Because I believe there's a lot of really rich, greedy people out there that are miserable. So if you don't have happiness, then what do you have in life?